Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the B20 Italy Inception Meeting, Reshape the Future, Include, Share, Act. This is the beginning of the Italian B20 presidency, the official beginning. My name is Giuseppe De Bellis. I'm the editor-in-chief of Sky TG24, the Sky Italia news channel, and today I will be serving as moderator and presenter of this event. I would like to start by thanking the leadership of B20, starting from the president of Confindustria, Mr. Carlo Bonomi, the B20 chair, Mrs. Emma Marcegaglia. Thanks, Mrs. Marcegaglia. I'd like also to thank the Italian Minister of Economy, Roberto Gualtieri, the B20 Sherpa, Marco Felisati, and the 8 B20 Task Force Chair. They will meet tomorrow. We're ready to start, and please join us and help me to join and welcome our first speaker, the President of Confindustria, Mr. Carlo Bonomi.
I'm happy to welcome you at the B20 Italy 2021, the official G20 engagement group reserved to business. The Italian G20 presidency has entrusted Confindustria with being the sole B20 host organization of the G20 Italy cycle. It is honor and privilege. We have accepted with spirit of service, conscious of the role of the G20 and of its utmost relevance, especially in the current conjuncture. Never in the recent history, the global community has faced a widespread, capillary, disruptive and persistent threat like the pandemic. In such a critical scenario, business is not only acting as a responsible and accountable stakeholder. While striving to remain on the marketplace, companies are called to boost economic growth, generate employment, spread innovation, promote sustainability, reduce inequalities. We are aware of our greater responsibility, and we are proud of it. But most of all, we are committed to provide a concrete contribution to overcome the crisis and to establish a new global paradigm. The G20 is the most prominent forum for international economic cooperation, where political leaders can share visions and set common objectives. But the current unprecedented circumstances urge them to go far beyond. One of these circumstances stands incomparable higher above all others, and it is the continued dramatic loss of human lives. We all remember 2010. Compared to last decade's crisis, the current one required the G20 to enact a systemic shift, a major change, as sharp and determined as is needed. The pandemic stands as a watershed. Its outbreak has revealed that the global governance is dangerously fragmented and intrinsically fragile. Whereas coordination, inclusion, and decision-making sharing are the only ways forward. We call on the G20 to become once again a board, where leaders agree on urgent actions, endorse a level coordination guideline, make them enforced, monitor their compliance, and task relevant international institutions and organizations to adopt binding rules where necessary. Dear Minister Gualtieri, the Italian G20 cycle faced epochal challenges, but it is their capacity to be game-changer. Business is committed to making 2021 remembered for a worldwide social, economic, and environmental regeneration. We deserve it, all of us, individuals, societies, companies, socio-economic actors, in advanced, developing and least developed countries in all regions of the world. To succeed, the role of business is undoubtable. We offer the G20 presidency a truly cohesive and long-sighted public-private partnership. We are ready to deploy our best efforts and energy to achieve the target. Confindustria has tasked with the B20 its best officers that are engaged in the B20 preparation since mid-last year or even before, closely interacting with their government counterparts and with all relevant international networks. Outstanding CEOs have started working months ago. First, and above all, Emma, who I have asked to lead the process, and then I thank for her unconditional support. Thank you, Emma. We are committed because we believe that we can make the difference, and we will. Business sees solutions where others only see problems. We find consensus where others fight. We strike balances where others fail to compromise. The G20 is called to deliver soundly, timely, and effectively. The time is now. Some encouraging signals start being visible. Not yet enough to see the light of the tunnel, but tangibly positive for the first time since February last year. Massive vaccine campaigns are ongoing in many countries. Our hope is that they will be run worldwide soon. Large-scale effect will take time, but the frantic search has finally concluded, and the long-awaited remedy is there. Huge stimulus packages are being deployed in the most world economies. We look for world market forces to remain the driver of the resource allocation, and that public funds are invested in a rewarding manner. Independently from the pandemic crisis, the geopolitical landscape has never been as complex for business as it has become in recent years. Market predictability was seriously hindered. Investment decisions were postponed or cancelled. Precious global value chains shrank or were destroyed. But major changes are likely to occur in the international chessboard. We are eager to see them taking place at the soonest. If G20 leaders will genuinely renew their commitment to the multilateral architecture, the marketplace will perceive appeasement. The economic recovery will take off more quickly, and the path to a long-term, fair, and sustainable growth will be clearer. Dear Minister, honorable guests, we are ready to support the G20 community in building a new era of growth and prosperity. Thank you for the attention, and I wish you a fruitful Business 20.
Now, Mrs. Emma Marcegaglia.
Dear Carlo, dear Minister Gualtieri, Secretary Kerry, President Sassoli, Commissioner Gentiloni, Vice President Scannapieco, Mr. Beasley, speakers and discussants, and dear colleague. It is with the utmost pleasure that I address this distinguished audience. I would like to thank all of our speakers and express my particular gratitude and a warm welcome to Secretary Kerry. Yesterday marked the beginning of the Biden administration, and this fills us really with hope. We believe that now that America is back, as President Biden has said, our work to provide concrete responses to the great global themes, such as the fight against climate change and the return of a truly efficient multilateralism, can be enhanced. But we also believe that the conditions now exist for the rebuilding of strong relations between Europe and the United States. This, in turn, will favor international relations, which will be of benefit of all. At the outset, let me express my thanks to Carlo Bonomi for having entrusted me with leading the B20 21 Italy. I really feel deeply grateful for this and immensely honored. I will reward your trust, Carlo. Today marks the official start of our B20. Over 1,000 delegates from the G20 countries, including top executives from the leading multinational corporations, the B20 overall brings together 3,000 participants, representing a community of over 6.5 million businesses. This is the engine of the world economic development. We have witnessed an enormous interest for participation in our B20 because the Italian G20 and B20 will be of extraordinary importance. And we know why. 2021 must be and will be the year of the Renaissance. It must be remembered as the year when the virus was defeated and the year when the return to growth was made possible. As Carlo has said, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but how we will emerge from the crisis and what awaits us is still not clear. But our idea of the future is. It is right there where you see our claim. So we say, reshape the future, include, share, and act. So we know that the world will never be the same again. We also know that serious problems were troubling the global area even before the pandemic, undermining our capacity to create jobs and growth. Think, for example, about the crisis in multilateralism, or again, conflicted international relationships all over the globe, or a rise in protectionism, or still growing inequalities with the nations, or profound divergences on how to pursue sound and long-term environmental sustainability. So problems were still there to be solved. But the first thing we want to say and to underline is that the greatest lesson learned from the pandemic is that global problems can only be faced together. There is no other way. The only other way is conflict, is war. So this is what we mean by share. We have to decide together and solve the problem together. Restoring a sound multilateralism is first and foremost a cultural mission. Closure and nationalism only make tension more acute, doesn't solve problems. But we need also multilateral organizations that are capable of dealing with a global paradigm that is radically different and incomparably more complex compared to the reality when they were conceived. The clearest example in this case is the World Trade Organization. We all know that it has been done to lower the duties, but now to need to deeply rethink the way it works, because we need that. So as I said, the first thing for us is to share, to work together. But this is not enough. We need also a model of growth based on free and fair markets and on the innovation of companies to boost employment. It's not the state that create employment, it's the innovation of the company. But we also need companies to take on a strong responsibility to reach a high level of social inclusion and environmental sustainability. The sense of responsibility must especially be channeled towards our youth and towards women. And so in this case, better education, digital skills, employability are key. This is what we mean by include. I want also to underline that competitiveness and inclusion go hand in hand. Neither can stand alone without the other, since reinforces industry competitiveness multiplies its ability to encompass an inclusive and sustainable society, and thus strengthen long-term competitiveness. So we talk about share, we talk about include, now we want to talk about act. The Italian G20 and B20 will be anything but a formality. We are absolutely determined to have a real and lasting impact because we need it. And as business, since we are the one who create jobs, who knows the market, who boost innovation and employment, we are convinced that we can strongly contribute to reshaping a better global paradigm. Our voice must be loud and clear. And through the G20 Italian presidency, we will convey policy recommendations and suggest concrete action that will need to be duly considered and hopefully adopted and enforced, timely and effectively. To ensure complete synergies with the G20, we will estimate their impact against the UN SDGs and the G20 claim, people, planet prosperity. There are grounds for a truly fruitful B20 and G20 partnership, and as Carlo has stressed, the time is now. Our recommendation will come from the work of our 8 task forces and their 1,000 members that I want to thank. And also, I wish also to thank the Italian chairs for the passionate commitment and all the Italian and international CEOs and the principal, the Business Federation, for their invaluable guidance. I want to conclude saying that even though the scenario is still uncertain, we have a positive vision and feel ready to face the challenges ahead of us. But we are also determined to take full advantages of the enormous opportunities that stand before us. Italy is a long-standing, reliable Atlantic partner. We feel enormous respect for all the countries. The kind of respect that is inherent in our culture. We are open, flexible, intrinsically innovative. We are the land of beauty, for sure, of cultural heritage, but we are also one of the world's stronger manufacturing industries projected towards the future. So I have no doubt that Italy will rise to the occasion and demonstrates its strong leadership. Thank you for your kind attention.
Italian Minister of Economy, Roberto Gualtieri.
This is an important opportunity to present the main priorities of the Italian presidency to some of our most distinguished stakeholders. Italy is taking up the G20 in an extremely challenging environment. We expect 2021 to be the year of mass vaccination and victory against the pandemic. The world economy has shown a remarkable resilience in recent months, even as many countries were savaged by a second wave of the pandemic. World trade and manufacturing production have resumed expanding, and this is thanks not only to a more selective approach to lockdowns and social distancing rule, but also thanks to vigorous fiscal and monetary policy actions. However, the battle is far from over, and the global recovery is still weak and uneven. Most importantly, the legacy of the crisis will weigh on our societies for years to come. And against this backdrop, policies need to remain supportive until the recovery is firmly established. We believe that reversing fiscal accommodation at this stage of the pandemic would be a costly mistake. However, the focus should gradually shift from current expenditure and tax breaks to investment, both public and private, in order to regain output losses and promote growth.
I think it's appropriate that we're at the early hour from our point of view after the inauguration yesterday, because really time is of the essence. We really literally do not have minutes and hours to waste in this endeavor. And more than ever, I think it is clear the importance of the private sector cannot be overstated. In my judgment, I felt this way when I left being secretary, no government is going to succeed in individually solving this problem. It's going to take the private sector massively all across the planet to push the technology curve, to do what is necessary to create the products and use the marketplace effectively to be able to encourage the behavior that will be necessary to reach our goal. We began down that road in a serious way yesterday when President Biden signed the instrument to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And he has put together a team, which I'm privileged to be part of, climate experts and leaders, all of whom I think share the same vision here. So with a few strokes of the pen, he reasserted our leadership. And let me just make it clear, we will move forward with a combination of humility and ambition. And I say humility because obviously we know with pain and some embarrassment that for the last 4 years, the leader of our country chose to pull out of the agreement and frankly engage in reckless behavior with respect to the future of people all over the world. But on the other hand, we come with great purpose for higher ambition because we have been involved in this for a long period of time. I personally was in Rio, 1992. I've been in Kyoto. I've been in countless COPs in various parts of the world and had the privilege of leading our negotiating team in Paris. And so even while we are still upset over what has happened over the last 4 years, we know that we just have to make up for it. And we have to get to work after 4 wasted years during which the United States should have been helping to meet this challenge. And we thank Europe and congratulate Europe for the many ways in which Europe stepped up and worked hard. I will mention one thing that many people aren't aware of. On the day that President Trump pulled out of the agreement, I joined with Governor Cuomo of New York, with Governor Inslee of Washington, with Governor Jerry Brown of California, and we announced jointly that there was a movement in our country called We're Still In. And we worked hard in the country to stay into the Paris Agreement. 38 states in the United States of America have passed renewable portfolio standards. And so they continued to work to meet the Paris Agreement. And more than 1,000 mayors, the mayors of every major city in America, remained in on the Paris Agreement. So while the president pulled out, I think it's safe to say that those 38 states represent 80% of the American people, and the American people remained always committed to this endeavor.
È stata una fortuna, nella sfortuna di vivere un tempo così difficile, aver colto l'opportunità di mettere a fuoco la possibilità di far concentrare a 27 paesi dell'Unione Europea i medesimi sforzi per ottenere i medesimi obiettivi, quelli che ci porteranno nel 2050 ad essere i primi della classe, il primo continente a emissione zero. Abbiamo bisogno di lavorare intorno a delle modalità nuove. Non eravamo abituati e oggi dobbiamo allenarci a fare in modo che l'obiettivo di salvare il pianeta sia conciliabile con la sostenibilità, con il concetto di sostenibilità economica, sociale, perché nessuno resti indietro, perché nei paesi che partono svantaggiati e i cittadini non subiscono gli effetti ancora più forti di una disuguaglianza, e quindi abbiamo bisogno di usare questo periodo. Noi ci siamo dati 2 obiettivi, il 2030 e il 2050, come obiettivi, come termini per verificare l'andamento delle nostre politiche. Siamo entrati un anno fa nella più grave crisi dal secondo dopoguerra e l'Unione Europea ha cercato, dopo un primo momento di sbandamento, di concentrare i suoi sforzi, abbandonando molti modelli del passato. Nell'Unione si è sempre parlato tanto, dell'importanza dei vincoli e delle compatibilità, ad esempio economiche. Quei modelli sono saltati, sono stati sospesi, se non addirittura messi in discussione, e questo ha portato a un nuovo concetto di solidarietà. L'idea che tutti e 27 paesi stanno spendendo tanti soldi per lo stesso motivo. Ci porta a una conclusione, che abbiamo bisogno di politiche comuni. Naturalmente tenendo conto che chi parte da posizioni migliori farà debito, chi parte da posizioni svantaggiate farà ancora più debito, e naturalmente tutto questo non può pesare sulle generazioni future.
Monetary policy has played a key role in protecting the economy from the risk of financial meltdown. Central banks around the world adopted accommodative stances that prevented the economic shock from spilling over in the financial system. In Europe, the ECB timely pandemic purchase program stabilized the markets, while incentives to encourage bank lending avoided the risk of a credit crunch. I believe we can expect that this kind of supportive monetary stance will continue until we are out of the woods. Fiscal policy has played and will continue to play an equally important role. Governments have adopted trillions worth of measures to protect people's jobs and help companies stay afloat. These have ranged from additional government spending, for example, to support the health sectors, SMEs, and employment insurance schemes, to tax deferrals, liquidity provisions, and guarantees. In Europe, critics used to point out, not unfairly, that monetary policy was the only game in town. The European Commission was quick to suspend state aid rules and fiscal rules, giving national governments the budgetary space to prop up the economy. On top of that, as you know, the EU took a historic decision to issue for the first time common debt for a common purpose, counter the shock and build back better. The 750 billion Next Generation EU marks a watershed in European integration and ensures that monetary and fiscal policy can support each other. Going forward, I believe fiscal policy should continue to strengthen the recovery. At the Commission, we have already made clear that our fiscal rules will remain suspended throughout 2021 and for as long as necessary. Looking across the Atlantic, the stimulus package announced by the new US administration goes exactly in the same direction. In the aftermath of the pandemic, we will need to reflect on the legacy of high public debt and return to pursuing more prudent fiscal policies. But we are not there yet. Not while our economies are still operating well below their full capacity, and not while every day in the EU we lose around 2,000 of our citizens to the coronavirus. Fiscal and monetary policy can provide much needed breathing space, particularly in the short term. But our aim cannot be to simply have a plus sign in front of our GDP figures. We would fall in our responsibility if we did not take this opportunity to address the defining challenges of our time and put our economies onto a sustainable growth path.
Last year, the pandemic hit the world with its devastating death tolls, health implications, and economic crisis. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came along with a series of additional global emergencies. The United Nations Development Programme estimates that economic consequences of the global health crisis will bring 44 to 250 million people back into extreme poverty in the next 10 years. Should this prove to be true, it will wipe out the results of the constant effort to lift the entire world population out of the worst living condition, which means essentially those who are living with less than $1.9 per day, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. This contrasts sharply with the impressive increase in wealth of the 10 richest individuals in the world, who increased their personal fortunes by more than $400 billion in 1 year and contributed to the rise in wealth of the almost 2,200 global billionaires whose aggregate assets amount now to some $10 trillion. So 2020 was indeed the apex of inequalities, and we are all aware of the risks that extremes inequality may imply. And this was a point that was highlighted rightly in a view from Chairman Sassoli. So at the same time, the maneuver space for governments is narrowing down. In fact, the entire world has fallen into an abyss of debt, which creates a huge burden on the shoulders of the younger generations. In G20 countries, the government debt on GDP ratio increased by 1/5 on average, moving from 60% in 2019 to 72.5% in 2020. Clearly, not every country has the same fiscal capacity to tolerate such a sudden increase.
Develop herd immunity in every society where we're operating. Obviously, the success of capitalism and a rollout of a vaccination in 10 months is really an extraordinary blessing that humanity has created. And that in itself is something to just pause and reflect on. But now we have billions of people who need to be vaccinated to get herd immunity. And until we have that herd immunity, in my mind, we're not going to have what I would say the economy to be more balanced. Right now, we are witnessing parts of the economy is doing really well because behavior changes during a pandemic and how we work and live. But we just cannot really build up the remainder of the economies that have been left behind because of the pandemic. And those components of the economy, I call it the aggregation part of our economy, is where people come together, whether it's cultural or social or travel or sports. We could go on, and we all know what that component is. Until we have safety.
How many percentage of the population need to be vaccinated for us to put these lockdowns, for us to put the pandemic behind us?
So Francine, that's a really good question. And today, I don't have the precise answer about how many need to be vaccinated because I think we don't know. This is a new disease. We are not absolutely certain how effective all the vaccines are yet in the long term. There is potential for the virus to modify and evolve its genetic makeup. We already see that with 3 strains, one here in the UK, one in South Africa and Brazil, that may make it more transmissible.
As we know, the pandemic has devastated every sector of business, particularly on the international trade. So look at China, for example, the whole supply chain, including manufacturers, sales channels, and logistics, was severely affected in Q1 last year. But thanks to digital solution, e-commerce has disrupted the traditional trade. We can see from the government's data that sales volume of cross-border e-commerce jumped over 30% last year. We also benefit from digitalization. In our e-commerce platform, sellers and partners could sustain their growth with digital tools.
This has been a very difficult time for everyone around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has killed more than 2 million people, and it has upended the global economy, throwing millions more out of work. But while life as we knew it came to a halt this past year, the effects of climate change continued to devastate communities around the world, causing trillions of dollars in damage. So climate change is an economic crisis too, and no vaccine will end it. So as we rebuild and recover from the pandemic, we need the private and public sectors to work together to confront climate change with the urgency that is required. The market has a critical role to play in that work. Since 2015, I've helped lead a global effort to create standards for businesses to disclose critical information about the impact of climate change. It's called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD for short. Risk disclosure may not be the flashiest way to speed progress on climate change, but it is one of the most important. And it's also a win-win for all parties involved. Business leaders want to reduce the risks they face, and this framework helps them identify and understand those risks. The better they can measure risks and opportunities, the more effectively they can act. And investors, lenders, and insurers need to understand the impact of climate change on companies in order to make informed capital allocation decisions. So far, more than 1,700 organizations in the public and private sector, representing over $17.3 trillion in market capitalization, have endorsed TCFD disclosure framework.
One of the most important time frames that we've had in a very long time. And let me sort of give you some good news, and then I'll give you some very bad news. And the good news is when you look at food security and poverty around the world, it's hard to believe that 200 years ago, a population of about 1.1 billion people on Earth, over 95% of the people on Earth were in extreme poverty. Just imagine what that looked like. 200 years later, in a population of 7.7 billion people, give or take, less than 10% of the people on Earth are in extreme poverty. So in the last 200 years, empowering the private sector, engaging as we have shared more wealth, more opportunity than any time period in world history. That's the good news. We've made great progress. The bad news is we still have 10% of the people we're not reaching. Now, if you're in that 90%, great. But if you're in that 10%, they're wondering, where's the prosperity for me? And if we don't reach that 10%, you end up with mass migration or destabilization or famine or poverty, starvation, etc. And what's really heartbreaking is there's about $400 trillion worth of wealth on Earth today. And not a single child should go to bed hungry, much less starve to death. Now, here's the really bad news. When I joined and took the leadership at the World Food Program 4 years ago, there were 80 million people on Earth that were marching to the brink of starvation. Now, that's people that don't know where their next meal's coming from. There's about 700 million people that go to bed hungry or struggle with hunger around the world. But we're talking about the worst of the worst. They don't know where the next meal is, and they're literally marching towards starvation, 80 million people. Now, 3 years later, meaning at the end of 2019, right before COVID, that number had gone from 80 to 135 million people. And the question is, why? With all the wealth and technology, what are we missing? And the answer, of course, is not to tear down the systems that we've built that are reaching the 90%, but how do we reach that last 10%? And then the question today is that why is the severe hunger rate spiking? And the number one answer is man-made conflict, whether you talk about Yemen or Syria, and I could go along 18, 19 other places on Earth where there's conflict.
A debate which, as our opening speakers this afternoon made clear, could not be more timely. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, critics were warning that the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, which laid the foundation for the post-war economic order 76 years ago, and whose goals and spirits still inspire global policymakers, were, as Emma Marcegaglia said in the opening session, designed in a world that was radically different and far less complex than the one we're in today. She also therefore questioned, are we at risk of them being doomed into irrelevance if they can't reform and reinvent themselves to meet the challenges of the 21st century? As Roberto Gualtieri said, quote, renewed multilateralism is a precondition for progress. And Carlo Bonomi underlined the need for major change, describing this as a watershed moment after a crisis which he said has revealed that, quote, global governance is dangerously fragmented and intrinsically fragile. And finally, both Carlo and Emma said, the time is now. So what neat changes are needed to make global economic governance fit for purpose in the face of these challenges? And just how radical do those changes need to be?
The COVID-19 pandemic triggered an unprecedented health and economic crisis. It has threatened and continues to threaten the lives and livelihoods of millions of people around the world. It also put added strain on international relationships. In some instances, these disruptions, as you noted, have further exposed the shortcomings and vulnerabilities that the global governance architecture was already struggling with. But if there is one thing that the pandemic has reinforced, it is the lesson that global challenges, be they of a financial, health, or other nature, require global solutions. Among the many recognitions of this, G20 leaders last year remained firm in their conviction that, and I quote, coordinated global action, solidarity, and multilateral cooperation are more necessary today than ever, close quote, and pledged to lead the world in shaping a strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive post-COVID-19 era. COVID-19 remains first and foremost a human tragedy, and saving lives is the natural priority. But the economic dimensions of the crisis threaten to compound its negative effects, and saving livelihoods is also of paramount importance. Both these priorities have international as well as domestic dimensions. And given the borderless nature of this virus, global action needs to accompany domestic efforts. Here, the WTO, as part of the architecture of global economic governance, has an important role to play. The remit of the WTO, clear in the name, is trade, and its niche in the architecture, the rules-based multilateral trading system. That system, resting on the contract between members, has three components: implementation, in both its monitoring and enforcement elements, rulemaking, and what's often termed the deliberative function. All three of those components have played a part in what the WTO has been able to contribute over the past year, and each will be critical in the path ahead.
No, absolutely. As David Walker underlined, this is indeed a watershed moment. And I was actually in the first meeting of the Sherpas, of the G20 Sherpas, that is running in parallel of your panel. And several Sherpas underlined the fact that 2021 can be the year of multilateralism. And it's indeed badly needed. This crisis has been destructive. We have undergone a major contraction of global GDP. This crisis has also been disruptive. It has brought to the fore some trends, like digitalization, for instance, that were already in the making. And also this crisis is revealing, if you think, for instance, of the nexus between health and climate and pandemics, which require a sort of integrated policy response to that. And all these challenges require a multilateral response. So there are basically, we are at the crossroad. Either the crisis will lead to further inward-looking policies from countries, or maybe it will be a new impetus to multilateralism. It seems that with the new geopolitical environment and a new administration in the US, that maybe the second option will be the one that would prevail this year and in the years to come.
For me, as somebody who sat in a multilateral institution and tried to get things done for 7 years, I think too often we think of multilateralism as a theology, as opposed to a tool. I think multilateralism is a tool, and there are some problems which are best addressed by the tool of multilateralism. We've heard a lot of discussion of issues like global health, global pollution as issues that require inherently a global solution. There are other problems that don't get fixed by multilateralism and indeed can be deadlocked by multilateral discussion. And so I think we should be clear-eyed and practical in how we deploy different tools, whether it's the WTO or the G20.
Vision is wonderful. We saw that kind of vision after the Second World War, but you don't get anywhere with vision if you don't actually have the action and the leadership to support it and to reach it. So of course we need vision. I would argue that some of the vision is not that different than what we've had before. I would argue that our implementation of some of those visions has suffered in the last number of years. And I love Michael's optimism, the glass half full. What I think is very interesting, and I did say at the beginning, I think where we can go is learning from some of the lessons of COVID. I think one of the biggest single lessons has been the importance of collaboration. And I would stress not just collaboration among governments, because frankly, I'm seeing that more and more difficult these days. Even in my own country of Canada, we have 13 jurisdictions in addition to a federal government. We've had 13 different sets of rules, 13 different sets of protocols. It has been challenging. But what I have seen is the private sector stepping up in a really big way. We have major corporations had set up a coalition of collaboration on testing, testing COVID test kits, as well as protocols. Some of them saying, here, you go test this one and see what happens. You go test this one on your factory floor. That kind of private sector collaboration, which is of course what the B20 is all about, is I think a major part of implementing the vision that I think we have.
Well, first of all, let me really thank all the speakers, the panelists, and all the entrepreneurs, and all the ladies and gentlemen who followed our work. Well, first of all, let me say that a first achievement is that more or less we are on time, which is not was a little bit difficult, but we are there. No, I think that I'm very happy because I think this event has been a very interesting one, at least from my point of view. I think that all the people who spoke today, coming from institutional, political, or also business leaders, I think everybody has given very clear and important messages. And maybe the most important one that I think I can say is that we have to work all together. This is the time to do it. We have to go to work together, public, private, companies, and this is the time really to go on and to make progress on the most important and key issues. I think I can say that it has been quite some time since I last listened to kind of volitive assertions as those that we heard today. And I have sensed also a kind of true commitment to change, and I hope that this will be brought to action. And as I said in my first speech, we will do all our best really to act, to see real progress and results from our B20 and of course the Italian G20. I have registered an incredible number of inputs, and there are a lot of things I think we can do. So I don't want to draw any conclusion, but that just make some remarks on what I consider maybe the most important thing I heard. First of all, let me say that I'm very happy and I thank Minister Gualtieri because the 6 points that he underlined that are at the core of the work of the Italian G20 are totally in line with our view and of our work. So we will develop these 6 points. Health, you remember, he talked about health, he talked about tax, he talked about climate change, he talks about investment. So all these points will be developed on our task forces. So first of all, let me really thank Minister Gualtieri for this, and also for the involvement that he said he will do with us and all with the engagement group. The second thing I want to underline is that it is very clear, and this is also what we said and also Carlo said at the very beginning, this is really time to make recommendation, to make progress, to achieve a real economic growth with environment protection, with human and labor standards, and with a strong inclusion. This is clear. I think it is possible to do it. All our speakers has talked about that. There is the way to do it, and we will work on that. I was very struck by what Mr. Beasley said about the fact that when you talk about inequality, the first thing is, of course, talking about people where starvation doesn't have food. And he said something that is very clear. He said, well, when we talk about starvation, we are talking about inequality, which is coming mainly from conflicts and climate change. So the second point that I want to underline is that climate change is a key topic. Everybody has said that. I was very happy to hear the strong call from Secretary Kerry. I think we are all there. We all believe that we have to go faster, we have to do more, but it's also very important to say that the fight from climate change has to be based strongly on company investment, on technology, on companies create employment and good jobs on this. So this is very important. We have to go faster, but the core is also on investment and the role of businesses. Also, I want to underline what Mr. Beasley said about starvation, the food program. It is very important that business is involved, not only because we have to put also our money there, but because we need our strategy, they need our strategic way of thinking and of doing things, mainly for the big multinational working in countries where starvation is still there. So, of course, as we said, very good work with the Italian G20. Important point on creating a good balance between economic growth, environmental protection, and labor standard and inclusion, climate change, where we have to do a lot of things. Multilateralism, I think everybody has talked about that. I agree with what has been said in the last panel. Multilateralism is not an ideology. Multilateralism is a tool, so we have to progress on that. What we said at the beginning is that for us, multilateralism means also to say we are against nationalism, we are against protectionism, but I agree on the fact that multilateralism means also to create new tools, to be agile, to really progress on how to really go on what we need. And finally, three more things. The digital is very important. We heard about that. I agree with Diane on the fact that digital is the engine of growth. Digital transformation is very important. But I also agree on the fact that we still have a gap in the skills, on digital skills. And so this has to be also a very important point on which we have to work all together. But I also had that we also need a harmonized standard and the regulatory frameworks also when we talk about digital. So this will be also a very important point. The other point, as I said, is skills, is education. One of the most important things is that everywhere in the world we need to have better education, but also access to education for all the kids, and this is again a very important thing. We will also work on the global financial system. Larry Fink said very interesting thing on the attention to ESG financing, to the fact that we will go through a very personalized way of doing this, but also he underlined that companies understand this very well and are going through that. Last but not least, I kept this at the last point. We want to work very strongly also on health. As you know, tomorrow will be the day of the presentation by our chairs of the different task forces. We have very important task forces, but we decided to introduce a new one that it has never been in the B20 work. This is health, life, and science. We want to have this. This is a new thing. We give a lot of attention to this. So vaccine is very important. Access to health for everybody is very important. Focus on working together, focus on new technology, and focus on research is very important. So I finish saying thank you very much. I think this was a really fruitful conversation. We will work in the best way possible. We will work hand by hand with the Italian presidency. But I want to conclude saying what everybody has said in this panel. the private sectors has a very important role if we want really to progress and to solve problems, because we know the market, we are the one that can make the investment on climate change, we are the one who can help on fighting starvation because we have expertise on this. So the role of private sector is important, and as I said at the beginning, we will take strong and deep responsibility really in trying to solve the problems that we have with us. And finally, I want to say challenges are there. The crisis is not finished, uncertainty is there, but as I said at the beginning, we have a positive vision, and we think that there are a lot of opportunities that if we work together and we are very committed to work, we can transform into growth, new employment, new jobs, and as it has been said in the final panel, we will restore trust, because trust is the most important thing. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Marcegaglia. So we arrived at the end of our first day, the first day of B20 Italy Inception Meeting. We will be back tomorrow for the closing door meeting. As Mrs. Marcegaglia said before, it's a meeting focused on the work of B20 task forces. And at the end of the day, the B20 will be back in next coming months for other deep events like this one. All of them will be inspired to the claim, the payoff of B20 Italy 2021, Reshape the Future, Include, Share, Act. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panelists, to our guests. Thanks to you that follow us on TV and website, and have a great day. Bye.